There are two important facts about life you might not know. One, no mineral is more crucial to longevity than magnesium. Two, the most effective form of magnesium is stabilized magnesium ions. That's where REMAG comes in by Dr. Carolyn Dean. Experience the benefits of stabilized ionic magnesium and support your health today. Visit RNAreset.com and use offer code MIRACLE10 for 10% off your first order. Visit RNAreset.com and use offer code MIRACLE10 for 10% off your first order.
Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Katz and Cosby with John Katsimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Katsimatidis and Rita Cosby.
Well, it is the final countdown, and John, 25 days.
36,000 minutes.
Do you know how many seconds?
Oh, well, you got to make it say 36,000 minutes.
36,960.
Oh, yeah,
that's right.
Governor Patterson, you're the best one. You're the best counter here. I know that.
What's 36,000 minutes times 60 seconds?
It would be 216,000 seconds.
Wow! What a show off! Ed Cox, this is a professional man here.
2 million seconds.
2 million.
Oh, 200. Yeah.
Doesn't even better counting votes.
Yeah.
2,116,000 seconds. That's it.
Okay. Wow, and that's how much time is left.
And President Biden has left town today.
Yeah, he went to St. Croix.
He went to St. Croix, and they're shutting off all the phones and communications.
Is that like
that way we can have no damage?
That's what I was going to say.
The question becomes: are they going to give him a signing machine so he can do another 1,500 pardons every day,
or give it to somebody else on his staff to sign on his behalf? What do you think about that?
I think it's outrageous, is what I think.
By the way, did you see Judge Weinberg that President Trump put out a note about those messages, and he said, you know, the people on death row who got the lucky break, Christmas break from these folks, and they're the worst of the worst.
The worst of the worst.
One who killed 12 people.
Yeah.
He said, quote, you can all go to hell. Yeah. What do you think of that, Ed Cox?
I would have been more John. You know where you can go.
Spoken like a true gentleman.
By the way, one of the people, so you should know, whose sentence was commuted, had already killed a correction officer in prison. So you're just encouraging that kind of violence within the prisons against all the staff and other prisoners. It's absolutely reprehensible.
It is a disgrace. And speaking of prisoners, everybody, you guys, is talking about this case with Eric Adams now coming forward. I love this, that he's saying this. He is pushing for federal charges against the Guatemalan migrant, the guy who crossed the border illegally twice. This is the guy who lit the woman on fire and let her burn. And now they're saying that she is so, you can just imagine what the worst kind of death ever. They can't even ID her. They're going to have to go to dental records because, it's just horrible. But this is interesting because if he can get federal charges against,
death penalty.
Yes, and it's a sign also that he's working with Trump too. Also, at Cox,
well, I am sure that President Trump, if New York can't rule themselves, he'll make sure the federal government rules it by creating federal indictments instead of, on serious crimes.
Yeah, and it's a message. It's a great point, John, because it's a backstop.
I mean, I'm not even a lawyer. Let me talk to the lawyers. Judge Weinberg, Ed Cox, Governor Patterson, you are lawyers. If there's a serious crime like this, the problem with Penny, not Penny.
With which case? Which one?
The one in the F train.
The F train, the Guatemalan guy. Yes, the Guatemalan guy.
If it's a serious problem, the federal government is going to step in and make it terrorism.
If they can come up with a cognizable crime, they should definitely charge under the feds. The state won't do the job. The feds can do the job as long as there's a crime under federal law.
Governor Patterson, have you ever talked to the Speaker of the Assembly?
Mr. Hasty?
Yes.
He doesn't talk anymore, does he? I left here one night last year, and I was in an Uber, and I picked up the phone, and he doesn't even identify me. He says, when are you changing your registration to Republican? I said, Carl, I've been trying to reach you for 6 months. If that's what it takes, I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah, you know what? For you to sign.
And you know what? If there's ever a case for giving the ultimate punishment. I can't think of anything more severe than this monster, this guy. His name is Sebastian Zepeda Khalil, 33 years old. He was living in a homeless shelter and lit this woman on fire. I mean, to me, if there's ever a case to say, yeah, that guy deserves the ultimate punishment, don't you think, Judge Weinberg?
You're absolutely right. And I'll tell you what's very troubling about it. It's what we call here at WABC the Daniel Penny effect. People watched it happen the same way people were stabbed at Grand Central Station, and people let it happen and just watched. People are being deterred from being good Samaritans. That's the Daniel Penny effect.
And by the way,
that's what Alvin Bragg has brought to the city.
And later on in the show, guys, we have a blockbuster show. We're going to be talking to Claudia Tenney in just a moment, the Congresswoman. We have Alan Dershowitz. We have John Solomon, also Brent Sadler. We also have Thomas Kenneth, who is the attorney for Daniel Penny, and he's going to be talking exactly about that. So that's a good thing. By the way, Governor Patterson, I got to ask you, because you were talking about Luigi Mangione and the perp walk.
I am just going to say what Mayor Adams wants to do with the perpetrator in the subway case, I think is brilliant. I think it's brilliant. However, you have to remember when you're in government exactly where you are in government. He's not a part of law enforcement. He is not any act that anything he does during this time is considered political. And the reason there's a presumption of innocence in this country is because he's not supposed to, as the head of the city, presume the guilt of this man, even though we all know he's guilty. But they don't need any more. They've got enough evidence. Injecting himself in that situation, I thought, was short-sighted.
But Governor Patterson, a defense attorney for Luigi Mangione, who's a great defense attorney, and I'm all for everybody getting the best defense possible. She was upset that there were police officers walking with guns next to Luigi, saying he's not a threat. I'm sorry. Somebody who opens fire on the United Healthcare CEO.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
With us today. Let's move on.
I agree with you on that point, Rita.
Okay, good. I agree with you on that one.
We have Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, and we got problems in Washington on the race. Well, Claudia, you know you're the expert. What the heck is going on in Washington? I saw the former Speaker
Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy.
No, the Democratic Speaker.
Hakeem Jeffries.
The minority leader.
Yeah, and he spoke with a vengeance. And I was very surprised. He's usually a mild-mannered guy. Spoke with a vengeance. I'm not giving Mike Johnson not even one vote.
Yeah, he said he's not going to help. The Democrats will not help Mike Johnson.
So, Claudia Tenney, you're the expert. What the heck is happening?
Well, why should they give the Republicans anything? We need to learn how to stick together and find a way to come together.
Well said.
Wow.
Well
said. For
said.
their own future, the Democrats would probably be smart to stick, to have some of the moderates, some of the people that are in districts that Harris lost, would probably not be a bad idea for them to come to the middle a little bit and at least to the center left and have a little bit of common sense. But I don't know if that's going to happen. But, one of the things, I'm just going to say this quite honestly because that's the only way I can be. That's the way I was brought up. My dad was a New Jersey guy, so I can say that honestly. But look, there are people that in this political world now who get social media engagement, and they can actually monetize it. And that's what worries me, is they also like to leverage their vote for something, which is human nature and which is part of like this kind of ugly game we play in Washington. But we're in a real critical time now where we have a new incoming president. We have a Senate majority of larger than our House majority, which is 3, and we don't have room for error. And so getting Trump's agenda through is going to require the president to really get in there and start saying, really helping the speaker get things together. Now, the question is, some of them say they won't vote for Speaker Johnson. They don't like the CR and some of the bills that were put through. But, a lot of them don't face reality. And a lot of them, by the way, have never served in the minority in the state legislature like I did as a Republican when it was like 102 to 100, I don't know what were the numbers.
48.
Really short, under 48, and then it got down to like, even lower when I was there. I started out, we had 51 Republicans. I left, I think there were only like 42 or 43. And Governor Patterson was there. He knows how difficult this is, but he also had the luxury of having the Senate as somewhat Republican so that there could be some kind of negotiation. But when you have no room for negotiation, you get people who, want to get what they want. And sometimes you have to look at what's for the greater good of America. And really, we want a conservative agenda, obviously, for President Trump, or an America First agenda, but not, you're not going to get 100% of what you want when you have a one-room margin for error.
You know what's interesting, though, Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, that the Democrats, and you know this, it's like they're sort of all over the place, a lot of them, but they always seem to vote in lockstep. And yeah, it's such a slim majority right now for the Republicans in the House. But how can that get together? Because otherwise, then it sort of rests on President Trump to have to come in and step in every time. I mean, why is it that they seem to be able to vote in lockstep, even if they're all over the place? But when it comes to the vote, and yet Republicans seem to have just so many different personalities, and they can't rein them in.
Well, the Democrats recognize the importance of being in power, controlling the House gavels, controlling the floor, and controlling the agenda. A lot of these Republicans aren't concerned about that, and that worries me. And when they haven't been in power a lot, remember famously many, many years ago, there was this guy named Newt Gingrich, and he said, someday I'm going to be the Speaker of the House, and everyone laughed at him because the Democrats had controlled the House of Representatives for over 50 years, and everyone just said that's a foregone conclusion that the Democrats are always going to control the House. And then Newt Gingrich came along and others, and we've been back and forth, based on, midterm elections and things like that. But Nancy Pelosi, not my favorite person, but she understood how to make sure that people realized it's more important to be in power. And honestly, people would say, well, there were carrots and sticks. Well, there might have been in the state legislature where in Albany, for example, as a state assemblywoman, the majority leader or the minority leader controls, what office you get, how much staff you get, how much money you get for your staff, and all those things they control. But in the House of Representatives, every one of us is treated equally. We all get the same amount. And so there's no leverage by the leadership on that part, but it's the understanding of power. And I think that's one thing people used to say, well, geez, Nancy Pelosi must have put pressure on AOC to get her to calm down. I don't think so. I think AOC recognized power, and that's why it's important, because there really was nothing that Nancy Pelosi could take away from AOC. She had a lot more social media following. She was raising just about as much money as Nancy Pelosi online and all those things. So I think it's a more practical approach. I think the Republicans could learn something from the Democrats on that, quite honestly.
Well, the Democrats love power, and the Republicans have them. They each has. I mean, we all have principles. That's when we vote principles, and that means you're going to get a shattered majority. But an interesting thing, you mentioned Newt Gingrich. And he broke the majority. The Democrats were the majority party until 94, from 1932 to 1994. Since then, as you said, it's gone back and forth. Guess what? For the first time since 1928, people leaving this presidential vote, the voters, 37% were Republicans and 31% were Democrats. The Republicans were more numerous in the voting booth than the Democrats for the first time. Are we on the way to becoming the majority party in the country?
I don't know if that's the case. I mean, the Republicans need to continue to draw more and more people to the fold. I mean, we're getting better, but I think that, President Trump presented sort of an eclectic group of people behind him. I mean, who would ever think in our era, in this era, that we would have the former the son of a former presidential candidate, the nephew of a former president, actually
RFK Jr.
and serving with a Republican. John F. Kennedy, coming up now with all the policies that are coming back. RFK, his son is now working for Trump. Tulsi Gabbard was head of the DCCC when she was in Washington at one point. I mean, who would think that all these people would be coming together and so many Democrats would be looking to the common sense party of the Republicans right now? And look, we're still very, very divided in terms of, different, the size of our tent. You have all the libertarians, the isolationists, all the different groups that all come together that generally are Republicans. And now you have, of course, they have them on the Democrat side, too. But I think that right now it's a question of very difficult to get the unity to happen, but it's going to have to happen.
Yeah.
Or or we're not going to get any of the agenda through, which is critically important to not just for preservation of the United States, but to keep the U.S. as the world leader, because when the U.S. is weak, the world is in chaos.
Absolutely. And listen, the American public have spoken. They want what President Trump, the agenda. So it's beholden to sort of push that through. So for so many reasons, Judge Weinberg.
Claudia, it's Richard Weinberg. Good to talk to you again. I just want to ask you about this bill that was just signed by Governor Hochul, the so-called Superfund bill, which is a penalty against oil companies of $75 billion. What is that?
Say it slowly. $75 billion.
Wow.
Which will be reflected to the consumer, I'm sure.
Right. And what does that do for American energy independence and making sure that we have enough air conditioning and enough heat? What's your thoughts, Claudia?
I think this is a disaster. I think it's probably dead in the water. I don't see, number one, how they're going to task the Department of Environmental Conservation to go out and collect this $75 billion. Are they going to sue, and then the oil companies are going to win this in court? And who's going to pay those legal fees in the end? And what's going to happen to all the businesses and the people that are dependent on baseload power in the state of New York with this really just absurd climate or commute, whatever that CLCPA bill is. I wasn't there when it was passed.
Right, but this new one is a Superfund, which is exactly a penalty. It's on top.
Exactly. Well, it could drive. I mean, getting that money out of the oil companies. If they leave New York and we no longer have access to natural gas and fossil fuels, let's look at it this way. I think 60 or 70% of the state of New York is dependent on fossil fuels, the entire state. 99% of New York City, the most populous city in New York, is dependent on natural gas, and the only pipeline that gets it up there is to the West Side Highway out of New Jersey. There are no pipelines, and there is no way to, other than through trucks, to get natural gas, really life-saving, LNG and other things to Long Island, to other parts of the state, other than through, these transmission lines. I actually live in the district where all of the nuclear power plants that are operational in the entire state are in my district in New York 24. They're along the shoreline of Lake Ontario. I have Niagara Falls at one end, and what most of the upstate New York relies on this type of energy, which is technically green and obviously emission-free. But we also live in the rural areas. We have farming, and how are we going to survive without natural gas? And these climate leadership goals of that bill, the original Green New Deal, are impossible to meet. And you even had the testimony this week of a former NYSERDA guy that I think was John Howard testified that this was absurd, that we weren't going to do this. You're going to see mass out-migration, catastrophic situation if you have extremely cold weather or something that could happen here, a lot of snowfall where I live. This is going to be a real problem for the state, and Kathy Hochul is going to own this. Yeah, for sure. Well, Congresswoman, thank you so much for having it. We love having you here, Claudia. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Happy New Year to all of you. You too. You too. And now we have Professor Alan Dershowitz joining us. Professor Dershowitz, thank you so much for being here. Some Democrats, and this is a topic, boy, do you know well better than anybody, Professor, the 14th Amendment. They're bringing up Section 3, 14th Amendment, saying maybe there's a way to block Trump because of, quote, the insurrection rebellion, and explain why that is just so ridiculous on so many levels.
Well, it's Professor Lawrence Tribe going crazy, construing the Constitution as a democratically written document to help the Democratic Party and hurt the Republican Party. There's nothing to it at all. The Supreme Court has already decided the case. Anybody who brings that case now, it's absolutely frivolous. They try to keep him off the ballot based on that, and the Supreme Court said no, so they can't prevent him from becoming president now that he's been elected. Look, this is what's destroying the Democratic Party. This is why I left the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has become the party of woke intersectionality and total nuttiness. They are the party of Palestinianism, anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism, you name it. And I can point to people who represent that point of view, not only in the Democratic Party, but who spoke at the Democratic National Convention. Look, the Republicans have some people as well, but they're not as central to the party. They're much more peripheral, whereas Sanders and Warren and OAC and the Squad, they have destroyed the Democratic Party, a party that I voted for since 1960 when I was 21 years old, and I voted for John F. Kennedy. And I'm no longer a Democrat. And I didn't leave the Democratic Party. They kicked me out. They said, no, we have no room for people like you because you're a person of common sense and liberalism and moderation, and you're not an extremist, and you're not anti-Israel, so you don't belong in the Democratic Party. So that's why the Democrats lost and why they'll continue to lose if they continue on this destructive, self-destructive path toward the left.
Professor Dershowitz, I was watching someone on the media the other day, and they said, these commutations by President Biden for some of the worst on death row, that's okay. But boy, if anybody from January 6th gets out, that's terrible. I mean, what's your reaction when you hear that kind of rhetoric from some people?
Well, it's exactly what you would expect. Look, there are people on the left who are adoring this kid who shot in cold blood the CEO, Luigi. There are people on the left who love Hamas and who cheer when Israelis are murdered, slaughtered, and raped. There are really, really extremists on the left. There are, as I say, a couple on the right as well. But the Republicans have done a much better job in marginalizing their crazies on the right than the Democrats. The Democrats have incorporated them. They've tried to create a big enough tent to include, people like AOC and me. Well, AOC and me cannot be in the same tent. You have to pick and choose. And they chose AOC, and they threw me out, and millions of other people like me who represent a kind of common sense, old line, Roosevelt, Jackson,
the guys with the gray hair
point of view, Pat Moynihan, all those people would today be thrown out of the Democratic Party. Bill Clinton made a speech the other day in Michigan in which he blamed the failure of the Palestinians to get a state clearly on Palestinian leaders and said the fault lies with them. They turned down a deal, and you can't expect a deal to come again. He got booed. You should see the social media stuff against Clinton for just saying the right thing. So, today Clinton probably couldn't be nominated.
That deal was in December of 2000, and Ehud Barak gave much more than he should have to the Palestinians, and they should have taken the deal. Isn't that right, Professor?
Even the Palestinians, the smart ones now admit that. They got 96% of the West Bank, 4% of Israel to make up for the 4% they didn't get, the entire Gaza Strip, 2 units of the Palestinian, of the old city of Jerusalem, a symbolic right of return, some reparations, capital in Jerusalem.
Wow.
They got everything. But as Bill Clinton said, he was right. The Palestinians didn't want a state. They just wanted to kill Jews and make sure that there was no Israel. That has been their goal from the beginning. When you go to any of these demonstrations, you never hear a call for a two-state solution because these demonstrators don't want there to be a second state. They just want there to be the state of Palestine, which will repress Palestinians and treat them the way they treated the Palestinians in Gaza.
And Professor Dershowitz, you probably saw this. I mean, there was a new poll that said 2/3 of Palestinians want Hamas in a new government in Gaza. I mean, that is really, after all this, wow. And
we don't know whether they really do or whether somebody's pointing a gun to their head.
Right.
But the idea that Hamas will give Palestinians rights, no. Women will have no rights. Gays will have no rights. Of course, if you're a Jew, you get lynched. I love this. Palestinians have this thing now saying, oh, my God, if Jesus and Mary and Joseph tried to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem, they'd be blocked by 3 or 4, checkpoints. No, they'd make it to Bethlehem and then they'd be lynched because they're Christians or Jews. Christians and Jews can't live in peace in places like Gaza.
I think some Christians
only Sunni Muslims.
Some Christians are being hung or killed beheaded in Syria.
Yeah, it's so sad.
As we speak.
Yeah, so sad. Professor Dershowitz, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you being here.
Monica, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everybody. I love being on your show.
Oh, we love you
too.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you.
And you guys, we have a break. And then we have John Solomon with some good inside scoop talk. You just brought up Syria, John. He's got some inside scoop on who is running around in Syria.
Nine different tribes, I hear.
Yeah, and some of them are pretty bad.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Cats and Cosby on 77 WABC. Breaking news, WABC.
And with the latest breaking news, let's go to John Solomon of Just the News, the founder and great investigative journalist. John, you have some big stuff first on what's going on in Syria and the information that the U.S. government knows about some of these bad actors.
Yeah. Well, and you remember when Bashar al-Assad was thrown from power by the rebels, there was glee in the Western world, including inside the Biden administration. He was a brutal dictator. His family ruled with an iron fist for more than 50 years. But that glee has been overshadowing a dirty secret, which is the rebels who took over for Assad have had a significantly bad human rights record. They are deemed to be terrorists. This is a group typically known as HTS, and they've been on our terrorism watch list and terrorism designation lists since 2014. And there is significant evidence of their wrongdoing: kidnappings, killings, bombings, torture, forcing children into being soldiers way before their adult ages. That's just some of the things that are in the State Department, the Director of National Intelligence files that I was able to look at over the last few days. So we have to be very cautious. While we're glad that Assad is gone, most of the world is, these memos say that the guys who've taken over, even though they sound like moderates right now, have a long history of participating with al-Qaeda, with ISIS, emanating from one of the more famous early terrorism fronts in Iraq and Syria called the al-Nusra Front. Their leader embraced al-Qaeda's leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, before he was executed or before he died in a drone attack. There is real significant evidence that these guys are of great concern to the U.S. intelligence community. That's been glossed over in most of the media reporting the last 3 weeks since Assad was overthrown.
John, it's Richard Weinberg. The problem is he's mouthing the right things. So he's giving a public relations campaign to Western media and Western political people who want to think well of him and apologize for him. And the problem is you have to judge him by his history and his acts now, and how he treats the Kurds, the Christians, how he moves closer to threatening Israel. This is what you have to judge him on, not the rhetoric that he spouts, but the real actions. What say you?
I think you're exactly right. It's why I wrote this story, because I think there's been a lot of people focused on the rhetoric lately, and he does sound like a guy who wants to run the country and be favorable, but the truth of the matter is he has a 15, 18-year history, this group does, of treating humans in the most uncivil of manners, much conduct of terrorism, much alliances with people that we in America don't want to see, alliances with ISIS and alliances with al-Qaeda, not subtle ones, but overt ones. And so that's the purpose of these documents and putting them forward, make sure the American public know and have eyes wide open that what they may sound like right now may not really be their true tactics and their true DNA.
Governor Patterson.
John, this wouldn't be the first time that a new leader that has a checkered past comes in and sobers
up.
In
the Middle East.
Because
yeah, that's called Thursday
exactly,
on the Middle East.
Because the fact is that he can get a whole lot of attention. It's ego gratifying for him to say these things, and right. A little part of him might even go along with it for a while. But a leopard doesn't change its spots. My question to you is, do you think that to some degree the United States was suffering with the previous leader, knowing what would happen if he did get taken out?
It's a conundrum, right? Because the rebels that were fighting him, we knew had long alliances. There are other, we've got ISIS still out there, has a big part of Syria that it still controls. Syria is a very toxic environment where any one of 4 or 5 different groups could ultimately take control of the country. There's no real clear leader, with the exception right now that HTS has control. This terror group has control of Damascus and is working with the West, working with their Arab allies right now. But Turkey's sitting in one border looking, maybe they're going to do something. Israel's taken a little bit of territory on their border to give themselves a security buffer. And in between those two buffers, there is a witch's brew of different groups, all who have long, violent histories, many who have terrorist ties. And I think at the end of the day, the Biden administration, our intelligence community particularly, was aware that behind Assad's fall was a lot of uncertainty about the future. There's nothing guaranteed about a successful Syria going forward without American leadership to maybe perhaps guide it.
All right. Well, John Solomon, keep us posted. You always have great scoops. Thank you very, very much.
Great to be with you all.
You too, you too, and Happy New Year. Yeah, thank you, John.
And any top news?
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
John, there's always lots of good hot news. You know that, guys. And boy, here's something the MTA is going to head back to the drawing board after New York State lawmakers, Governor Patterson's holding the hands over his face because he just can't believe they have to go back again, right? Well, they're going back to head back to the drawing board after New York State lawmakers rejected the agency's capital plan, a Christmas Eve letter sent from the New York Senate and Assembly leaders to the MTA chair states that there's a significant funding deficit of many billions of dollars, which needs to be addressed before the program's approval. And also 3 people are recovering from injuries in the hospital after a yellow cab plowed into pedestrians in busy Midtown Manhattan. Police say that the cab driver had a medical episode causing him to lose control and ended up on the sidewalk by Herald Square late on Christmas afternoon. It was crowded, as you can imagine, and all of those hurt, luckily, are expected to recover. And those are the big headlines of the day, guys. And after the break, we're going to talk to a cyber expert. John nailed it. John was talking about some of maybe the cyber attacks could have played a role with the airlines. And we're going to talk to a cybersecurity expert about that after the break.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
With us today is Alexei Bunazel, and he is a non-resident member for the Foundation of the American Innovation. And you call yourself a little bit of a cyber analyst, and you know your way around. There's been a lot of problems lately. And you are the go-to guy to tell us what the heck is going on in the airline industry.
Well, there was a major outage at American Airlines a couple days ago. I think at this point, as dust has settled, it's not looking like a cyber attack, just some kind of glitch in their IT systems. But it is extremely concerning, and we had a number of flights that were grounded, folks trying to travel for the holiday, for Christmas, unable to get home to their families or return from the holiday because of just a glitch in the American Airlines software. And you can imagine...
I was on the Alexei, I was on the air at that time live, and I figured that they solved the problem so fast that it was a cyber attack, and they paid the $2.
Looks like it was just a glitch at this point, from what I'm seeing.
Understood. And now, today, they're also yelling about that there's other cyber attacks coming in. And
That's right.
What are you hearing?
So I'm really concerned right now about a cyber attack known as Salt Typhoon. And this is an attack coming from China against many of the major global telcos. So the phone companies that provide our phone lines, like the phone we're talking on right now. And the Chinese, over the past couple of years, have hacked into all of these telcos and are able to listen to our phone calls. They could be listening to us right now. They could be reading our text messages. And you've seen the U.S. government put out a couple advisories, some notifications about this, do some press conferences, but very little action to actually kick these hackers out of the telcos, to respond to them. And it's extremely concerning. I think it's one of the biggest cyber hacks for the past decade.
Understood. What's the future of not being in these kind of problems?
Well, I think there's a lot of work that tech companies can do to level up their software, make it inherently more secure. But there's also a lot that the U.S. government needs to do to step up. When we have foreign governments hacking into our critical infrastructure, putting cyber time bombs in our power plants, in our water systems, when they're hacking into our telcos and listening to our phone calls, this is something that the government needs to step up and solve. If this was in the real world and we had terrorists planting bombs or planting bugs in people's offices to listen to their conversations, you would have the government respond. And right now, the government has largely ceded the response to the private sector and left them on their own. And at the same time, we've also seen a lot of regulation coming from the government and this sort of finger wagging and punishing private sector companies when they get hacked. Now, we wouldn't expect a private sector company to defend itself from terrorism, but when it's digital terrorism or digital military operations against a private company, the U.S. government really has done that.
Alexei, what else would you... The drones, any gut feeling what they are?
Seeing all kinds of reports, and I'm not sure what to believe. It sounds like some of the drone stuff has gotten a little quiet recently, but could be a foreign government doing reconnaissance, could be any number of things. Could just be hobbyists.
Understood. Well, Alexei, we'd like to talk to you again real soon, and have a Happy New Year, and we'll catch up again soon.
Have a Happy New Year.
Very interesting, John. And we'll see. I mean, you had some interesting points too, John. So we'll see, right, as maybe more information.
I don't think anybody really knows.
Yeah, I don't either. Just like the drones, right?
What do we have now, Rita?
Well, joining us now is Brent Sadler. He is with the Heritage Foundation, a 26-year Navy career also. Brent, great to have you here on Katz and Cosby. This is Rita Cosby. Brent, first off, let's go right to everything that's happening, especially with Russia and Ukraine. It looks like lots of Russian attacks on the power grid. We were just talking about cyber and all this other stuff potentially hitting power and everything else. We know the Russians were targeting, in this case, physically targeting lots of the power grid, and there's a lot of people in Ukraine that are freezing right now. Where do you see all of this headed now, given especially the fact President Trump is coming in 25 days?
Yeah, no, well, thanks for having me on, and hope everyone had a Merry Christmas as we look towards the new year. But unfortunately, this war in Ukraine is probably going to get a little bit more violent before it gets to a point to where it can get settled. I mean, both sides see President Trump coming in and understanding that he's proven in the past he's able to take it and willing to take it to the next level if both sides aren't willing to negotiate in a conflict. And so I think there's some urgency. And so what you're seeing on both Kiev's part and Moscow's part is to try to make sure they have the strongest position going into a negotiated truce. I'm not sure they'll be able to get the war resolved, but certainly stop the killing. That seems to be the number one objective of the next administration. But these attacks on the power grids, this is par for the course. This is the third winter that we've seen this.
Ed Cox here, Brent. You served as a military diplomat in Asia, and yes. Interesting things are happening in South Korea. How much influence do you think the Chinese have with respect to our supposedly close ally, South Korea?
Well, it's no secret. The Chinese, they have, a united front work, which goes back to the days when they were fighting a civil war, where their intent is, like a fifth column, to infiltrate and to sow discord and start to win over turncoats in an adversary's government. And so the Chinese have done this throughout the region. They did it in South Korea, but if you look back maybe about 8 years or so, the United States government was trying to put a THAAD anti-missile battery in South Korea. This was viewed by the South Koreans as defense against rockets and North Korean provocations. That peaked in the early part of Trump's administration, and things turned well, but the Chinese overplayed their hand. They leaned on the politicians there in Seoul, and a lot of Koreans for the first time started to see the Chinese not interested in unifying their divided country and also not willing to take an interest in their own self-defense of Koreans for Korean self-defense. And so
Brett,
a lot of that's been weakened.
Brett, some of my intelligence sources say that in the next few hours, tomorrow morning Korean time, that they're going to try to overthrow the democracy and have a dictatorship.
That would be really challenging. I mean, we had the current president declare martial law, which really, it failed. But it also, I think, didn't really take into account that there's still a lot of very raw memories by Koreans that witnessed the military dictatorship fall largely by people power in the late 80s, and really no one, conservative, liberal, none of the political parties and the majority of the Korean people want to see a return to that. And I think they don't draw a distinction between someone that's acting on behalf of China or the North Koreans as any different.
I guess we'll know by the weekend.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say?
No, I just hope everyone has a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's been a challenging 24. But
thank you, and we'll catch up soon.
Yeah, thank you, Brent, very much. And John, also, you talked a little bit with Andrew Stuttaford of the National Review. He does a lot with the capital markets.
We got a few minutes. I cut out a few minutes for us to listen to. What's going to happen in the new year? Well, we have Andrew Stuttaford with us, and he is with National Review. And so many things are happening, especially in the electric vehicles market, where President Trump has made certain statements. Well, Andrew Stuttaford, give us your vision of what you think President Trump has said, and what do you think electric vehicles going to happen in 2025?
I think it's going to be a mixed picture. I think that the president, the new president, President Trump, will be faced with some tricky issues, but I think it's fairly clear that there are one or two things that he wants to do. The first is he wants to get the control of the regulation of the of the auto sector back to the feds. But you can't have California effectively setting the pace and having a unilateral auto regulation regime, which basically forces automakers for the whole country to move over to electric vehicles, because of course the California
electric vehicles, whether it's electric or gas, has to be regulated on a federal basis for the whole country. It can't be state by state.
Exactly. Otherwise, it's a shambles.
Yes.
Otherwise, it's a shambles. And as we all know, California has been very set on the EVs. They have put in place their own regulatory structure, which unfortunately has been adopted in other states, including essentially this one. And that is designed basically to squeeze, not totally to eliminate, but to squeeze a lot of traditional cars out of business, regardless of what, mean that they're not available for sale, at least as new models, regardless of what the feds do. And that is just a nonsense. We're talking about a national industry here. So I would expect the Californians to stick to their guns, and I would expect the Trump to try to get this changed. And it may well involve a legal fight, and it may not be over in 5 minutes. At the federal level, what I would expect, I don't think that, President Trump is aware of the fact that the EV market, EV industry in this country is in trouble. He's also aware of the fact that it already employs quite a few people, and that the auto sector is not in good shape in many respects because of the electric vehicle adventure. I mean, they've been forced to make cars that people don't want to buy, and that's not really a recipe for success.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. And John, you are going to have the rest of it on your Sunday show. I can't wait to hear the whole interview with Andrew.
Yes, I will. And let's take a break.
Yeah. And you know who we have? We're going to talk about the Daniel Penny effect, because there's been all these horrible cases in New York of bystanders just literally
and
watching.
Nobody wants to help.
Which is really sad. And guess who better than Daniel Penny's attorney, Thomas Kneff, coming up after the break.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Well, we are back here on Katz and Cosby, and these horrible cases that have happened of late, including this Guatemalan migrant who lit a woman on fire, watched her engulfed in flames, burned to death, and there were bystanders who were around and did nothing. A lot of people are wondering, is there a Daniel Penny effect? Of course, the hero Marine, but people afraid to step in because he got dragged through, and there's still a civil case going on with that. Well, who better to talk about all this than Daniel Penny's attorney, Thomas Kneff. Thomas, we love having you here, and you did such a great job, first of all, with the Daniel Penny case. What is there a Daniel Penny effect where people are afraid to get dragged into cases now? Then there was the case in Grand Central, too, where two people got stabbed and a lot of bystanders. Are people afraid to step up and do the right thing like Daniel did?
Well, good evening, Rita. Good evening, guys. Always fun to join you. And I don't know what's going on in people's heads when they're seeing these horrific incidents. The people that are there witnessing them. But I guess my answer to the question is, why wouldn't there be? Well, why wouldn't there be a Daniel Penny effect? I mean, anyone who followed this case, and we know many people did, the case of my client over the last 19, 20 months, and saw the hell that this guy went through. I've been having this conversation with a lot of people who approach me, friends, family, strangers on the street since the verdict, and said, "Oh, your client must be so relieved. It must be wonderful for him." And of course, I mean, I can't overstate, how elated we were with the verdict, but that just doesn't go away. I mean, living under the weight of a felony indictment, the anxiety that, if this doesn't go right, that you could wind up in state prison, that takes a mental, emotional, physical toll on any human being.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed Cox.
And then there's a civil suit going forward also. So it just doesn't quit. Isn't that right?
It just doesn't quit. And of course, the consequences of a civil suit are much different than a criminal prosecution, because you're not talking about jail anymore. But it's still there. And the other thing is, a lot of people talked about, have mentioned the legal defense fund, which we set up for Danny, which was of course so successful, in part because of folks like you who helped us get the message out. And
how much was raised, by the way, in that defense fund?
Yeah, about $3.4 million.
Awesome! Wow, bravo!
And, it's great, but I make the point to people. I mean, look, a lot of people are congratulating myself and Stephen Razor and our team for the great legal work we did, and we're very humbled by that. But I'll tell everyone listening that the best lawyers in the world can only do so much without resources. And because we had that legal fund, we were able to do all sorts of things that an average person who, you mentioned the bystander effect, someone who intervenes in one of these situations, they have no guarantee that they're going to have a successful fundraising effort like Danny did, not only to hire Steve Razor and I, but the jury consultants we used, the security team to get us in and out of court, because every day we were being, harassed by BLM protesters and George Soros gig workers outside the courthouse, the hotel rooms, the expert witnesses. That was not a given when this case started. In fact, it wasn't even, we didn't even see that as a possibility when we first took this case on. So those things that all made us very fortunate, in defending this case, and made my client very fortunate in having that. Obviously, he's utterly grateful. But what does the average person that doesn't have a legal defense fund do if they go in and intervene and they find themselves, persecuted by Alvin Bragg's office or some other progressive prosecutor? So, of course, it's going to have a deterrent effect on people wanting to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Governor Patterson.
Thomas, how are you?
Governor, great. I've been telling everyone about the wonderful phone call you and I had last week, and what an absolute gentleman you are.
Well, his head is going to explode if you say that,
well,
Thomas.
I knew he was a gentleman when I realized we both graduated from Hofstra Law School. But the thing is, I want to ask you about this. I think these particular situations are hard to judge one way or the other. With Daniel Penny, I think that he at least knew that he had a certain amount of training. He kind of assessed that more people on the train would help him when he tried to stop the perpetrator. And it was a good decision on his part for why he got in there. But I would say that the average person, with some of the things that you're confronted with, are going to kind of back away. Now, I know that they started a fire, but we weren't there. It's hard to tell if you could, to what extent the fire had gotten before it overtook the victim. And all I'm trying to say is I think we're kind of hard on our fellow New Yorkers. There's a big taxi accident on Christmas Day, and 6 people went to the hospital. But the pictures showed that all the pedestrians jumped in, and about 4 of them moved the cab somehow to get the victims out.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, I'm not at all saying that because of what my client went through that there's not going to be, any more good Samaritans out there, right? And one of the points I've made in speaking about Danny and people like him is, look, they're a special breed, right? And they don't balance the equities, right? They're going in, they're going to help, and to hell with the consequence. You certainly can't expect that from everyone, and every situation is different, right? So, we see the video, which is really, you can't even watch it because it's just so horrific. We don't know what opportunity anyone on that specific train in that specific instance had to intervene. And then, even the police officers, some people are starting to, throw them under the bus because you see that police officer who walked by. But, look, and this is my area of expertise, maybe you need someone with a background with the fire department.
And by the way, also, like some people didn't even know, like at first, if it was a person on fire too,
right.
It's so horrific, you don't know.
The heat that they're giving off, the police officer, it may be very hard to get even close to someone. I'm not sure what they could have done without the proper tools at that point to try to rescue. I think that
we needed a Daniel Penny at that moment. That's what everybody needs.
Penny with some flame retardant chemicals and what have you, but. Just an awful situation. So, case specifically, I don't, no one can say for sure whether that is the, quote unquote, Danny Penny or Kitty Genovese effect. But I think in a general standpoint, to go back to the question that you started with, Rita, is, those marginal situations where you have someone who might otherwise have gotten involved, I think that it's going to be in the back of their mind or somewhere in their head that, look, I don't know that I'm going to do something here because I don't know how it's going to end up for me.
Yeah, and then what a sad thing. Before we let you go, how is Daniel doing? How's he handling everything? I'm telling you, what a hero. I'm so happy you said how much also the public came to support him.
Oh, it just made all the difference because, again, we were just able to do things. I'd like to think that we'd have a successful outcome either way, but, it certainly made our job a lot easier. He's doing well. I think it's an adjustment because he went from being anonymous then when this case occurred, a large contingent, sadly, even people in elected office trying to vilify him. To throughout the trial, and then when the verdict came down, then he went to almost like instant celebrity status, not a celebrity he's looking for. He's very humble. He does not he's not comfortable being called a hero. He doesn't look at himself that way, but just adjusting to being so recognizable and so ubiquitous now. It's a life change, but I think he's settling into it and starting to take it a little bit more day to day and in stride.
Well, give him our best and great job again, Tom. You and Steve did an amazing job, and the world was watching. Justice served.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Happy New Year, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thomas.
Tom. Thank you.
And what do we all stand for?
Truth, justice, and the American way.
God bless America.
Larry Kudlow here with an urgent warning. While we celebrate Trump's historic win, inflation continues to drain your IRA and 401k, and China is now targeting your money with a kill shot on the dollar. That's why thousands of Americans are shielding their savings with gold and contacting the experts at Colonial Metals Group. Gold has protected American wealth through every financial war. For a free 2024 gold guide that explains everything, please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908. The experts at Colonial Metals Group are the only folks I trust to help you bulletproof your wealth with gold. Go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908. That's 800-621-3908 for a free 2024 gold guide to learn how you can protect your life's work and if you qualify for a free home safe and up to $7,500 in free silver right now. freegoldguide.com/Kudlow.
This time of year, a good hoodie is absolutely essential. But these days, it's tough to find one that will last through the season. That's why the American Giant Classic Full Zip Hoodie is made to last a lifetime, so you can count on it to bring you comfort and warmth year after year. Slate Magazine called it the greatest hoodie ever made, and from cotton to zipper, it's made right here in the USA. It's crafted with timeless style, heavyweight fleece, a double-lined hood, and reinforced elbow patches, which means this hoodie can withstand any outing or adventure. It'll be your new favorite hoodie, and you can depend on it for years to come. Plus, buying from American Giant means supporting local communities of farmers, manufacturers, and more. This season, snag the hoodie that will bring you comfort for life, the American Giant Classic Full Zip, and save 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com when you use code CLASSIC24 at checkout. That's 20% off your first order at American-Giant.com, code CLASSIC24.